Hi, this is Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 63 of the Clarineat Podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm joined by the legendary Stanley Drucker, who is, of course, the former principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, a position he held for over 60 years. During his time with the orchestra, Stanley also maintained a busy schedule as a chamber musician and recitalist. He could, of course, be found performing at illustrious venues like Carnegie Hall, but you might be surprised to learn that he also performed quite often at venues such as churches and school auditoriums, which are places, of course, where you might not expect to find one of the world's greatest musicians. Today, our conversation focuses on this element of Stanley's work, and most notably the release of an exciting new 5-CD set called the Heritage Collection. This collection features live recordings made at many different venues, recorded over a 30-year span from the early 1970s to the mid-2000s. Stanley is joined in performance by world-class chamber ensembles such as the Juilliard String Quartet, and of course his wonderful wife Naomi Drucker joins him on one track per CD. She's also an accomplished clarinetist in her own right, and I'm thrilled to say that she, after my interview with Stanley today, joins me for a brief conversation of her own. If you'll be at this year's Clarinet Fest in Orlando, Florida, make sure to head to booth 419 where you can purchase copies of this new Heritage Collection. And Stanley will actually be on site at specific times to personalize and sign copies. Of course, he'll also be performing a feature concert at the event, which you don't want to miss. As a Clarineat listener, whether or not you can make it to Clarinet Fest, you can actually purchase a signed copy of the album until August 18th, 2017 by heading to digitalforce.com/clarinet. I'll be including a link to this along with detailed show notes for today's episode at www.clarinet.com. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank all Patreon supporters for helping make the show possible every week, and particularly our latest three supporters, Laura A., Josh N., and Justin P. Thank you so much for making the Clarineat Podcast possible, and of course, I'd like to also thank our sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Stanley Drucker. Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/woodwinds. So I'm here today with the legendary Stanley Drucker. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Stanley.
Pleasure, Sean.
First of all, congratulations on this absolutely wonderful collection of music.
Thank you very much. Jerry Bunky did a great job compiling all of this, and he deserves a lot of credit for that.
For those who aren't aware, this is a collection of music that's all sort of live settings, and the settings are not what you might expect for someone like yourself. What were some of the venues like when you recorded this back in the day for these pieces?
You're absolutely right. It could have been a school auditorium or a large open area in a building, or it could be a library. Or in one case, it was a wonderful chamber music hall in Tokyo. What's interesting and unique, I think, about this set is that all the performances are live. They're not studio recordings. They were just as they were played for an audience. And it covers a long period of time, of years, for this set. And it sort of stoked a lot of memories for me over the years, because I guess I was always pretty much in motion
Yeah.
to play all of these things and then do the kind of rehearsal and concert schedule that we had with the orchestra. The reproduction of these pieces on these discs is remarkable. I was amazed when I listened. They were really present.
It's so funny to me too, because the performance is just excellent, and I found myself, for example, the Poulenc, halfway through there'd be a little bit of auditorium sound, or maybe someone would cough or something, and I had to remind myself that these were live performances.
That's true, and there's a mix of periods of music. We have old music and middle and new. I feel that this represents a lifetime of work. I think it's amazing.
How did you find the time to do all this amidst your incredibly busy orchestral career, which in itself would have been remarkable?
Well, you left out the fact that I commuted also.
Yes.
So I lived 40 miles from Carnegie Hall or Avery Fisher, now Geffen Hall.
The entire time?
And, yes.
Wow.
So I did have to add the time of commuting into anything I did. But, I'd say that in that group of years, any player in that group of years never says no to anything. You're always rehearsing something or playing somewhere.
Does that still hold true today, do you think, for young players or players anywhere, just to sort of take everything as it comes?
My advice to a young player would be never say no, because one learns in many different ways. And if you might be playing with a small chamber group that plays the newest of music, unprinted manuscripts, where you learn how to read that kind of material and to try to innovate with by discovering new pieces and giving them a chance and see what develops. One can use up their time very easily.
Do you enjoy performing for a larger audience or a smaller audience, or what is that like for you?
These works, you're sitting very close to the audience.
Yeah.
They're part of the tapestry.
Mm-hmm.
But you connect with people when you can see them, and then again, you also, some of these pieces you get to play with colleagues, friends, and you get to share a performance. You try to enhance another player, and at one point, and the other player tries to enhance you at a different section. Mm-hmm. It's a true chamber music feeling, and that's what I love about this set is that it's not just clarinet and piano.
That's one thing I like about too, actually. Every CD seems to be organized as an album in itself. Like they could have each been released individually, almost like a full recital. Do you enjoy producing recordings in one take, or do you enjoy having the chance in a more studio setting to do separate takes?
What used to happen in sessions was that they never shut the machine off. They recorded everything from the moment they said go, and one could go back to refer to the first 3 minutes or something, or 2 minutes in, or so forth, so that you didn't miss anything. In a certain sense, the first time through is perhaps has a lot of quality.
Yeah, other artists I've heard refer to sort of kind of the magic of the first take, like it always contains the energy that you wanted.
I think in movie makers, they say Woody Allen doesn't like to overdo, so maybe it's the same thing.
Have you ever met him?
The first time I met him was when we were recording the soundtrack for the movie Manhattan, with Zubin Mehta conducting the film, and he was in the audience, and I played the opening, and he gave me a thumbs up, but I saw him a number of times after that. We met him at a play, an off-Broadway play once, and he said to somebody, he must practice a lot.
About you, he was saying?
Yeah, he said that. Woody said he must practice a lot. Yeah, I guess it was cute stuff. But he has toured as a clarinet player, playing with the Dixieland band. I knew Benny Goodman also. He was a very serious musician, and he was always trying to learn everything, and he was very meticulous in his approach to playing the clarinet.
What do you mean by learn everything? Like learn all the music he heard, or?
He wanted to learn from listening, from talking to people. He was always trying to find out what clarinet players did, how they did it, and it was part of his learning process.
So speaking of learning process, I mean, you had your first orchestral job at the age of 16, and few people know that by the time you were 19, that's actually your fourth job with the New York Phil. So what was your musical upbringing like, and how did you feel at that age? Well,
when you're that young, nothing much bothers you if you're focused on what you're doing. But I'd say I played in any group I could get into, community groups, amateur groups, and I played in a woodwind quintet. I played with the National Orchestral Association, which was a training orchestra. I went to the High School of Music and Art that had 6 orchestras and 2 bands, and there were rehearsals every day. And when I got to Curtis, it was non-stop playing. They had a great library of every piece ever written for the clarinet. And also, I didn't say no to anything.
Yeah.
And I started with the audition process, which is the only way you can try, to achieve some professional spot.
Do you have any advice for the young clarinetist who's out there today auditioning for orchestras?
Well, I would say keep doing it. The audition process is very different today than it was in my day. In the old days, if there was an opening to audition for, and you were lucky enough to be invited, you played for the conductor immediately, and the way it worked usually was they would say play something, and you would play what you prepared or what you thought you wanted to play, to make an impression. Then everything from that point was what they put out on the music stand for you. At that age, I certainly didn't have much experience with repertoire, so everything was a new piece for me. But you never knew what they were going to ask. Now, in addition, there was another situation with in those days, is that even if you got hired, if they didn't like you 2 weeks later, you could be fired. There was no such thing as tenure in orchestras in those days. You served at the pleasure or whim of whoever the conductor was.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so what occurred, I would say, some people would get a job and immediately audition for a better job. So they might stay a season here or two in one place and then go to a job where the season was 2 weeks longer, or they paid $5 more per week.
Wow.
So it ended up where you met the same people in various orchestras who moved on. It wasn't so organized where it is today. Of course, I don't think it was any easier then or now. I mean, it was the same situation. You had to play for a conductor eventually, and if they liked what you did, you would get a probationary spot. Or today it's very formalized, where they have people playing for a week or two in that probation period, and also maybe they're invited for one concert or two concerts to sit in and see how that works. So it really because today with the major or the close to major orchestras, there's job security, there's tenure and so forth, but the old days they were a little different.
Do you believe it's gone in a good direction generally?
Yeah, I think it's okay. You're not dealing with an exact science. Everybody can play the same passages.
Yes.
Everybody. The old days, it was one audition for a conductor, and you didn't know what he was going to ask. Everything was sight reading, and there's no sight reading today. Today, everybody is told what they're going to play, so they can practice, which is okay, and you can still find the best player in each system. The thing is, the seasons are long, and people want to get a good spot and a good city to work in, and it's the arts.
How do you deal with your nerves, and any advice for those who do get nervous?
Well, I think if you're very young, you don't get as nervous because it's not life and death. It's not desperation.
Yes.
I would say if two people auditioned and one was 20 and the other was 40, I put my money on the 20-year-old.
That's interesting.
Because it's not life and death. Playing music, playing an instrument, you have to do it when you're very young. To start, you have to start when you're very young. You can't finish high school and 4 years of college and then start to play and then try to win auditions. It doesn't work that way. You see, I saw my goodness, at Curtis they were 8-year-olds fiddling away in the halls, and pianists that couldn't reach the pedals that were marvelous. That's what it is. It's not exact.
So the key is to start young for the nerves.
The nerves are okay in a way also. I mean, if it stops one from performing something, then it's a problem. Then they probably are on the wrong career path. But everybody has nerves. It depends on several factors. It depends who you're playing for, where you're playing it, somebody is listening to you that knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, a great maestro or a great pedagogue. Now, the great pedagogues, some of them never made performing careers.
Mm-hmm.
People, like the string people, Ivan Galamian, Dorothy DeLay, they never made violin playing careers,
Mm-hmm.
but they were the most sought after teachers. So, I mean, they found their place with talent. In the winds, Leon Russianoff was that kind of a teacher. He didn't have to be a perfect orchestral player or recitalist.
I was just about to bring him up, actually. What was it like working with him, and what sort of impact did he have on you?
Well, he was Woody Allen and the Marx Brothers all rolled into one. I thought I would say, if I were to describe him, I would say he was very New York. His studio was at 1595 Broadway, corner of 48th Street.
Wow.
You couldn't get more New York than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was great. A man who was serious but had a great sense of humor and drive, and he gave to his students.
As far as Russianoff, like, this was a listener question, actually. And the question is, what kind of students did he take, and what were some of his teaching methods that you experienced?
Almost everybody around did take some lessons with him,
mm-hmm.
some for longer periods, and he worked with people in an individual way.
Mm-hmm.
He was I guess he had a great vision, understanding of human nature and personalities. So he could draw out of each individual student what they could actually come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, I would say, he was not the kind of teacher that presented a curriculum that was the same for everybody. He would write studies for a specific person, have them work on that, and have works that they could handle or not handle, as the case may be. He never made anybody feel inferior.
Mm-hmm.
One of his early students was Jimmy Hamilton, who was the clarinet soloist with Duke Ellington's band for many, many years. In fact, I remember a student recital in New York in the 40s, early 40s, where it was. I played in that as a little kid. I played a couple of pieces that Bellison had transcribed. He picked the pieces for me, and Russianoff did. And Jimmy Hamilton was one of the people in the program. He played the Debussy Rhapsody. He was a talented player, I'll tell you. And so people from various worlds in music came to him. Doublers, people that had different talents.
You've recorded so much music. When you look back, is there anything that particularly stands out as your favorite outside of the stuff that's included here on the Heritage Collection?
The cycles of things we recorded, complete Sibelius symphonies, the complete Schumann, the complete Beethoven, Brahms, the Mahler. We made two full sets of those, some years apart. And some of this, I would say, some of the recordings we made with Pierre Boulez, which I really love doing those. He did complete Mother Goose, complete Daphnis and Chloe, not just the two suites, complete Petrushka. Just the amount of recording we did with Leonard Bernstein was amazing. I mean, they were recording constantly. There was some great stuff being done.
What was it like looking back on working with Bernstein, Boulez, all these?
Well, everybody came with their own likes, musically speaking. I think of a Bruno Walter, who was an assistant to Mahler, for him to do Mahler symphonies, and of course the classics, because that's his era, and Stokowski, with his reseeding and doubling and quadrupling of solo lines in winds, very unique. Metropolis, he would rehearse without score.
Wow!
I remember we did Wozzeck of Berg in 5 rehearsals, and then the performances. 4 performances, and then we recorded it. He never used the score in the rehearsals. He even knew the rehearsal numbers.
Wow.
But he had that kind of a brain, so I say that all of these maestros, they came with material that they liked. George Sell, who was a music advisor in between after Bernstein, he was a classicist that had the great 19th century repertoire in his, it was great. And Boulez, of course, nobody was greater in the contemporary music in his ability to conduct the most difficult patterns rhythmically, perfectly, and one rhythm in one hand, another rhythm in another hand at the same time, and the performances were never psyched out, because he conducted the most difficult places the same way he did the easy places. So he was amazing that way. And of course, like every one of those, I played for 9 music directors, and I don't know how many guest conductors. There are countless, and they all had something. Zubin Mehta was amazing with repertoire, courageous, and probably the best accompanist for a concerto soloist, and spirit, great spirit. And Kurt Masur came from the Leipzig tradition. He was a classicist, and his I would say the music he loved the most were the choral works. St. Matthew Passion, Beethoven Missa Solemnis, the Brahms Requiem. Choral works were something he relished. Lauren Mazel was had one leg in each era. He came from the previous era into the new, and here is another guy that had the technique, a great way of individually doing the works that he liked. And he was a terrific violinist. Besides, we did l'Histoire de Soldat for a week when he was a guest conductor. He played the violin.
Oh, wow.
For the 7 instruments.
Yes.
The History of a Soldier, and he played from memory. He played the violin solo and conducted with his bow.
Wow.
When he was playing. So these kind of things show up. Metropolis, way back, would play a piano concerto. Lenny Bernstein, he played concertos conducting from the piano.
as an artist in the position of an orchestral musician, of course, you have to kind of adapt to the director or the conductor that's there for that rehearsal, right?
Absolutely. But we were very lucky in New York. We got the best that the world said was the best.
Was there one conductor that you not only felt that did a great job, but that also you identified the most with their sort of musical realization?
It's a collaboration. There's a lot of eye contact. I say that the best performances come with great eye contact, player and conductor. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if that would work with Von Karajan, who kept his eyes closed, but there has to be contact. One can't play with his head down into the music. You have to relate to what you see in front of you. Mm-hmm. That to me is one of the most important things for a player to realize.
Is there any pieces in here that you feel that a younger version of yourself would have played differently, or that you would have played differently had you played them today? And I ask because one of the things I think about is I remember Glenn Gould, when he performed his original Goldberg variations and then recorded the same thing about 30 years later, it was a totally unrecognizable. It was completely different, So I'm wondering, how would Stanley Drucker have played these pieces today versus yesterday?
I'm not sure. I think in some of them maybe a little more thoughtful, a little more careful. Maybe some of the tempos might be a little slower. It depends, because you think maybe you give it a little more gravitas. Where when you're very young, somebody tells you put that mouthpiece in your mouth and play. Without thinking, and that's what you do. That's why I get back to what I said. You have to really start young, and if you're lucky, lightning can strike. People say, "Oh, this is the ideal tone." There is no ideal tone. It's the tone you hear in your head and your soul. Mm-hmm. Everybody's tone is different, there is a middle of the road situation where, where basically you're not going to sound that. Nobody's going to sound that different. They years ago when I was a kid, there weren't so many recordings to listen to. Mm-hmm. The only clarinet player recording was Reginald Kell. We were lucky for that because he made some great recordings of the Brahms and Beethoven and Mozart trios and the Brahms Quintet he made in 1937 with the Bush Quartet, and other lighter pieces. I mean, he showed a side of clarinet that we weren't aware of, where the stiff, regimented kind of playing seemed to predominate in a certain sense, where everything had to be foursquare, and he showed a rubato. Mm-hmm. that was very personal, and it really had a soul and beauty. Now a lot of people didn't like his sound. They said he used an excessive vibrato. Well, maybe he did, but it was what he heard and what he wanted to express. Now, even the so-called icons of the past, Ralph McLean, I heard it. When I was at the Curtis, I attended every rehearsal of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he used a hell of a lot of vibrato. Let me tell you, it went from a note that had a lot of vibrato to a straight note, and then back. It was not like a flute, constant vibrato.
Yeah.
It was to emphasize something. But of course, it was a different. He played in the Great Hall and Academy of Music. He never had to play louder than mezzo piano.
Yeah.
And he was always in the quality zone. But today they say it's a beautiful sound, but it was very focused. It wasn't dark or wide. But look, everything works. I mean, it depends on the individual. There's the ideal. You have to decide as a student, you have to decide what you want to sound like. But right or wrong, there is no right or wrong. There's a wrong note, and there's a wrong style. I'll put it that way. If a piece has to have a certain motion to it, and you're playing it like it's gone out of style, that's I would call that wrong. But other than that, there is no right or wrong. But if you're in an orchestra, the person on the podium making requests is right, and you have to try to do what they do. That's what if you're in a quintet, everybody has their own voice to speak. String quartet, woodwind quintet, you can speak. A solo recital, you can speak. Orchestrally, you have to fit. Like I said, you have to enhance somebody at one point, and then a person has to enhance you at another point. And then those are the best orchestral players.
You said something really interesting a minute ago, and that was that, when you were growing up, there wasn't all that many recordings. And I would say nowadays it's funny because a lot of certainly not all of the recordings that I have, but a lot of them would have been recorded during your time with the orchestra. And in a way, I think that young kids nowadays, especially the youngest of kids, they have almost the opposite problem. There's so many recordings that they're not even sure which ones to listen to sometimes. And if you were to search any orchestral piece on YouTube, in addition to the many commercial recordings available, there would be hundreds of just sort of random performances. So looking back on that, did you feel the gravity of these recordings at the time, knowing how many people they would influence, and how do you listen to music now? How do you decide where to put your... Well,
you hear a good orchestra, a great orchestra, and an equally great conductor. You can search out the best of those. Of course, one doesn't listen to a recording just because they want to hear a bassoon solo played by Mr. Bassoon, And though I would say if you're that focused and you want a certain player, then you get, even if the orchestra isn't as good, you go for it. But I think there's listening to different performances is very important. It gives you a frame of mind. Certain pieces have prominent solos for your instrument, clarinet, and it's a good idea to hear a couple of different styles of how the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony solo is played, or the opening of Tchaikovsky Fifth, or things like Shostakovich symphonies. You get a feeling for it, and so I would say it's a listening game. You listen, and if you like a certain style of playing or a certain sound, it's very hard to put into words teaching sound. Very hard to do that. it's because it's listening. So you can only say I like this or I like that, but you have to decide what you like. What do you like? You hear a sound. You play a few notes. You like that sound. You like it, and they say I don't like it. What don't you like about it? I'm speaking of a person evaluating themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and see if they in the teaching situation, you can say what don't you like about that? Try this, try that, because it's not an exact measured science.
Mm-hmm.
Sound is very personal. You listen to the great violinists of the past. Joseph Szigeti didn't sound like Yehudi Menuhin, or Milstein didn't sound like somebody else. They all had their own sound. Not one of them was right and the other one wrong. That's the unfortunate
They're all right.
thing. They're all right.
They're all right.
Everyone is right. I said what's wrong is maybe a wrong note.
Mm-hmm.
Even that's open the question, or a wrong style. So playing the clarinet is not such a mystery. The most important thing is to have something to say musically.
Stanley, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your wonderful memories and stories with us. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we switch over to your wonderful wife, Naomi, for a little more conversation?
Well, I wish everybody success in their careers, and just love music and love clarinet, and thank you to everybody. I always try to do my best, and I feel I've had an interesting career, and I'm happy to hear the new players and wish them great musical success.
Thank you, Stanley, for all the great music over the years, and of course also this wonderful new collection which we can enjoy. You've touched the lives of so many clarinetists, and I expect that this set will really live on and touch the lives of many more.
Well, I hope people get a chance to hear it, because I'm very proud of it.
Absolutely. We'll make sure it gets out there. Thank you so much, Stanley.
Thank you.
At this point in the conversation, I turned the mic over to Stanley's wife, Naomi, who is an accomplished clarinetist in her own right. They spent a lot of time collaborating over the years, and this heritage collection actually features one piece per disc of them playing music together. After a brief introduction back and forth, I got started right away wanting to learn more about her time studying also with Leon Russianoff. So you, of course, also studied with Leon Russianoff.
I did, yes. But I had several very famous teachers before him. I lived on Long Island, and a famous composer, Gustav Longinus, lived on Long Island also. And I went to his house to take clarinet lessons. And every week he was putting those Longinus duets together as duets, and we played them together.
Wow.
And that was terrific. I also learned to drive the car while going to his house. I was 15 years old. There were hardly any cars on the road where he lived, so it was fine. And I had a very brave mother. She knew when to say, "Slow up!" So just to get back to that, the meeting Gustav Longinus was wonderful. He was very kind, and I was always prepared with whatever material he had given me because I loved doing that. And I also studied with Clark Brody, another professional player and teacher. But he was very boring, and I got out of that. I got out of that as soon as I could. My father was a musician, an automobile mechanic, saxophone clarinet player, and he taught me to count. So we would sit together with the music, and I would count 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and 1, whatever it was.
And how old were you?
I was 12, and that was, what a happier way could you learn to play.
Yeah.
He was wonderful. Wonderful teacher, wonderful man.
What are some takeaways from your time with Russianoff?
Well, Russianoff, it was always fun, I remember the first lesson I took with him, I got really dressed up rather fancy in a suit and high heel shoes and went to that studio and, chatted and so forth. And he said, "Well, let me hear you play something." So I took off my high heel shoes. And he said, "Baby, I love you." You can't play in high heel shoes.
Great story.
And I can't remember how many years I studied with him, but it was a good number of years. And I met Stanley there and many musicians. It was terrific.
Is that how you guys met?
Yes, met at that studio. Yeah. I was in the Stanley Drucker fan club. There were many people studying with Russianoff, and we all knew each other, and it was a very nice situation.
So I've got to ask, what was it like working together within the dynamic of your marriage in a musical sense?
Well, it was fine. I was a player, and we played together for fun, We said, well, what do we do? We were married and, at this point and in a wonderful marriage. And, when dishes were done and dinner was over or whatever, we said, well, let's go play some duets. I always enjoy playing the Longinus duets. They're very fine, very fine.
So there's never any sort of disagreements, or how did you handle those sort of things if they would come up? And I guess to be fair, I should have asked this of Stanley as well to give him a chance.
You make it sound too complicated. It is not complicated. It's very simple. It's musicians getting together to play. Married, not married, doesn't matter. There was an experience. We were in Japan in a performance. Stanley and I, and this, you think the Japanese is being very, very careful about what they say. This person said to me over the microphone, "Who plays better, you or your husband?"
What did you say?
And
this was asked in Japanese, and I had an earbud in so I heard the translation.
Yes.
And the audience heard it in Japanese, of course. Naomi was sitting off to the side, and she saw a funny look come on my face and the audience started to laugh a little. So the translation came. Who plays better, you or
your wife?
Or your wife? And the answer was, her father thinks she does.
When was this? When did this happen?
It was in the 70s.
Okay.
We've been to Japan a lot of times on tours, but this was one of the early ones.
Mm-hmm. What a great story.
We toured and played the recital, and I gave a class in 11 cities.
Wow.
And one of the performances was with an orchestra and a string quartet, and we played the Poulenc Sonata for 2 clarinets at that concert.
I do remember after one concert in Japan, there were two brave girls waiting backstage, and they touched me. They touched my shoulder.
Oh, wow.
They wanted to know I was real.
Naomi, do you have any interesting stories from being backstage at a concert?
I met Aaron Copland, who was walking down the same hall I was.
Wow. And
I told him that my 12-year-old daughter, that he was my 12-year-old daughter's favorite composer. And I tell you, what a great smile I got from him.
So, Naomi, you're also a very accomplished teacher. Where did you teach and for how long?
I taught at Hofstra University for 50 years and loved being a teacher, and always had students coming to the house in a private situation.
What is the main thing you like to instill upon your students? I mean, you mentioned that Russianoff sort of, you found it to be a happy time. You enjoyed the lessons, and do you like to recreate that environment for your students, or do you?
Absolutely, yes. A wrong note will never shake up the world. Try it a little slower. Let's look at it together. Let's count the music together. That sort of teaching.
I love that.
I taught from the handicapped and to the challenged, mentally challenged, mm-hmm. and to the most skilled and talented students. And enjoyed every one of them. And I never made anybody cry.
Not once?
Not once.
How many students would you say had the pleasure of working with you over those years?
Oh, my goodness.
Many?
Oh, yes, many, many, many. I have 60 students, maybe, 50 students over the years. I certainly didn't keep count. But I hear from students. I used to hear from more of them some years ago, but I still hear occasionally from a former student. That's just great.
Well, Naomi, I really want to thank you today also for taking the time to speak with me. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope that many, many people have the chance to listen to these recordings on the Heritage Collection. In the room there before we go is Jerome Bunke, who is not only the producer of this record, or the series of CDs, I guess, but he will be having an interview with me on the next episode of the Clarineat Podcast to discuss his fascinating career as a clarinetist and producer in his own right. Before we go, Jerome, though, is there anything you'd like to add today to our discussion?
Well, first, thank you for that and for everyone for making the arrangements. But as producer, one thing that really made me feel very, very gratified was your recognizing that each one of these discs could exist on its own, mm-hmm. and that it had the feeling of a recital within itself, because to go and end up being able to form a program.
Yes.
In the choices and putting this all together was really, really a challenge. And hearing from you, I really feel that I have a lot of feedback that I've accomplished that goal.
Well, and I do feel both for Naomi and Stanley there, I think that you guys deserve huge credit for these performances and the fact that, and it's a compliment, that many clarinetists going forward here are definitely going to be basing their sort of foundations for future recitals on these recordings for many years to come. So it's a huge achievement. I think you should be very proud of it, and I'm so happy to have had the chance to listen.
Thank you, and we look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks for listening to the Clarineat Podcast. For detailed show notes, head to www.clarineat.com. If you find that you enjoy the show, please consider making a small monthly contribution on Patreon to support its ongoing production. Depending on your level of support, you'll get access to bonus content, early episodes presented in high-resolution audio, live hangouts, and more. To learn more, visit clarineat.com and click on the Patreon link. Be sure to tune in next time for a conversation with Jerome Bunke, who of course was the producer on the Heritage Collection, which we discussed in this episode, but is also an extremely accomplished clarinetist in his own right. Jerome and I had a really great conversation, and I look forward to sharing it next week. Today's episode was brought to you by our sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds. Thank you so much for listening. Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit d'addario.com/woodwinds.